Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Australia. For anyone joining us, it's pretty sunny here where I am in Brisbane, Australia. My name is Tim. I come from the CluedIn team, and I'm joined by my colleague from Microsoft, Anthony. He'll introduce himself in a moment. I think we've got a good show for everyone today. Obviously, there's lots of different topics that are taking the limelight and the focus, and AI is definitely one of those elements. And I think we've all seen content around the power of the use of AI in chatbots and co-pilots and things like this. But one of the things that Anthony and I have been spending some of the time with our joint customers is how can it be used in the more day-to-day data management tasks? And so Anthony in a moment is going to take us through kind of Microsoft's and his view on what's so important to make sure we can enable these AI projects to be successful. And then Anthony's going to hand over to myself to walk through a particular scenario we did earlier this year with one of our customers. So with that in mind, I will hand over to Anthony to kick us off, share his screen, and go for it, Anthony.
Good morning, everyone, or wherever you are. Hello, and welcome to the session. So, as Tim said, I'm Anthony Free. I'm a data and AI technical specialist. I work at Microsoft. What that means as a data and technical specialist, I try to help customers make good strategic decisions on their investments on data and AI products across the Microsoft ecosystem, specifically in Azure. And so, I do that across everything from first-party services, like Azure SQL Database, to our AI services right there on the other side of the spectrum. So, level set, pretty much. This is my view. I do work at Microsoft, but this doesn't mean that these necessarily are all Microsoft views. So I'll take it from my perspective and just give you a bit of insight into that. And so, just to also let you know, this content, as Tank would say in the Matrix, is 100% pure, old-fashioned, homegrown human content. I did not use AI to make it. This is all me, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it gets a smile and it gets you thinking a little bit differently. So, when I was talking to Tim earlier on about the AI advantage and what that means in the context of data, I thought, like, where do I start? There's so many topics to cover. I mean, you can cover the models, you can cover machine learning, you can cover hype versus reality, you can cover the use cases or industry applications, you can cover history, the future, you can cover things like agentic workflows. And so I put a lot of thought and effort into it, and I eventually went with, let's eat grammar. And if I give you a few seconds just to digest that, I'm pretty sure that many are going to start to raise their eyebrows, start to point fingers at the screen, and start to go like, there's something really wrong with the sentence. And maybe there's particularly one small error that I need to deal with. But why would people get so upset or accusational about this one particular error? Admittedly, this sentence is actually the title of a book about grammar. Not grammar, but grammar, as in the structure of how we use language. And I thought it would inspire some interesting conversation, because I think it's relevant not only to the conversation around AI, but also the good foundations of good AI, which is good data, and how we garner analytics and use it in the world specifically. So, why grammar? Why? Well, a comma is really important in this context. I think just one comma completely changes the meaning of the sentence, right? It's a pretty big change, right? But why? We've had these structures and these rules we call grammar, and they've been shaped over time, right? That help our understanding and interpretation of what we see, so that we not only communicate more effectively, but that we can actually take the correct action. Because let's be fair, if I had to take action on this sentence, well, on the previous sentence, wouldn't be great, right? But the key point is the fact that humans are at the center of this. And that's vitally important, because that applies to AI too. Ultimately, it's humans who derive the meaning, humans who take the action from the sentence, as an example. And so the consequences of having poor understanding and poor context and poor quality have significant ramifications on the decisions and the actions we take, right? So a minor adjustment in that can completely change how we act. Now apply that at scale, right? You can start to see where these things go. But that's not different, right? So this idea of grammar and structure and quality and context doesn't just apply to AI as an example, but it applies to everything that we do, right? Whether we're writing a blog post or we are trying to understand someone, trying to adapt a business process, trying to change something over time. We're actively always doing this. We're always adapting over time and eventually connecting the dots. And so one thing that's interesting is that even in business, right, and business's data is just like language, right? It takes shape over time. It doesn't just stagnate, it doesn't stand still necessarily. We have ways that we take that data and we shape it and we refine it and we abstract it and we clarify it and we enrich it. But again, we do that because we want to take action on it, right? So the context and quality that we were talking about has a significant impact on the decisions we make. Now, not only that, but when you're making a decision, there has to be an accountability. There has to be a responsibility in that, right? Every decision we make has ramifications. So effective communication, analyzing data and taking action is really about communication. We have to be responsible, and that's the same way that we apply principles and practices to our data, our metadata management, our master data management, so that eventually, or even when we get to things like AI, we're taking that and we're designing systems with that in mind, that we have these principles embedded in these systems. Okay, and then I'm talking about machine learning or AI or business analytics, you name it. Now, if we didn't have good context, we'd potentially lead to pretty poor decisions. If we had poor quality, we'd lead to poorer decisions, right? And I think many of us can probably attest to the fact that poor decisions, have pretty bad outcomes. They have things like we can lose customer trust. That's terrible. We can be at reputational damage, have reputational damage. We can have things like legal and compliance risk. We can be financially hauled over the coals for what can be the outcome of a bad decision. And so you name it. I mean, operational risk, security risk, tons of things can apply to it. You name it. And unfortunately, many people get affected at the end of that because they're accountable for those decisions. Now, let's take another view of this, because I think this is all going to apply. We spoke about context and quality, and I think this is going to continue as a theme. But if I had to ask you, what would be the preceding sentence or phrase that leads to this acronym? I'll give you a second. One thing that's interesting is that right now, many of you are actually just sitting there. You're unpacking, you're reverse engineering what is something simple, and you're trying to expand it into something complex. You're doing that because there are these relationships that you've tied to this acronym, and there's a context to it that you carry with it, and you're trying to fill in the gap. We have this amazing gift as humans for simplicity. We try to strive for simplicity, because when things are too complex, we struggle. When things are too complex, but there's a consistency somewhere in that complexity, we try to abstract. We strive for some sort of simplicity in some way, shape, or form, right? We'll see that across many of our technology choices, the way we do development, the way we decouple systems, loosely couple them, the way we design them. There are ways that we try to build these abstractions so that we can make sense of it, make it easier for us to digest, work with, and scale. And so I'm pretty sure that many have used some sort of an acronym or abbreviation at some point, but we do that sometimes because we want to go fast, right? So we'll take a longer phrase sentence, we'll condense it, we'll squash it, and then we'll try to use that so we can either, probably it's due to our artistic flair, but try to do that for the sake of speed, right? We wouldn't want to type out everything every single time. So LLL just makes it easier, but there's always a trade-off. So what if I told you that what you thought it was isn't exactly what it was? What if I had to speak to someone who didn't necessarily speak English as a first language, right? What if I if I didn't understand the context of the acronym? Now, it's not only a contraction kind of conversation, but it's actually more a translation and integration problem. And this happens all around us, right? Like, I mean, every IT system that you look at, you could look at IT ecosystems across any of your environments, and you'd find that there are heaps of integration challenges that underpin these technologies, these business capabilities. You know, if you have to go from one technology to another, you have to ETL one thing out of another, you have to deal with multiple sources of truth of the same sort of entity around your business. And it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous in our lives. But when that happens, again, we see these abstractions, right? So we start to move towards these governance practices. How do we do metadata management? How do we manage our database systems? What technology choices do we make so that we make it simpler for the organization? And so you sort of see this all over the place, as I spoke about previously. Now, I can't keep up with absolutely every emoji, every acronym. I can't even keep up with the amount, let alone the amount of sentences or meanings and context around them, right? It's very, very difficult. And so same thing is that as those things move so quickly and I can't keep up with them, innovation's the same way, right? If we look at technology, it's so difficult to keep up with technology now. Things just move so fast. But there's areas there where AI can help, right? Not saying that it fixes everything, but it does play a role in helping us digest very complex structures in very easy ways, right? So it helps us deal with complexity. Now, my background is actually coming from a database administrator's perspective. When I started in databases in like 2010, roughly, I had no idea. Like, I came into IT with no idea about no comp sci, no nothing, and so I wasn't blissfully unaware to the innovations happening out in the open source ecosystem. But it took a while before I started to see how a relational database engine really works. And when I got the hang of it, I started to see that not that the software components are necessarily tightly coupled, but the system as a whole is quite tightly coupled, because the storage formats are tied to the engine, the security layers are tied to the engine, and you've got all these sort of metadata components that are also tied to the engine and the storage format, and so they're all quite tightly bundled up. And what's interesting about that is that you can't easily reuse that necessarily in other components, right? So you can't necessarily take that metadata layer and use it across other database systems as necessary, because there's an interoperability problem there. And so again, we go to integration complexity. Now, I'm not taking an absolute timeline look at this, but over time, you started to see that there's a number of innovations that came about to decouple these things so that they can operate at scale. Some places where these things are tightly coupled, sure, they can scale very well for the need. But other places, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So what we first started to see is like this separation of storage and compute. And so you'd see that in like MapReduce and Hadoop. And then the Hadoop ecosystem, once you had that separation of compute and storage, there's other capabilities that started to get added to it. You know, you added batch and stream. Well, you had batch, and then you had streaming, and then you had different interfaces that people could use and different experiences that were also decoupled, and people could pick and choose parts of it and enhance them, and really provide unique experiences or bring their best value to something that might have been old that needed to be refreshed, or something that they spotted was a gap. And so we'd see that. And the same thing for governance. We'd look for layers where governance would form at different layers, whether it was security, whether it was metadata management or catalogs. There'd be all these components that we would decouple, but then we'd have to deal with the integration. And so we decouple for scale and flexibility, but again, there's a trade-off. You end up in a situation where, because we have, and this is fascinating, I'm always stunned how amazingly creative and innovative people can be. Because if we look at this is just a view, and the attributions are at the bottom, but basically, this is a pretty common slide, is like the data ecosystem today. There are tons of products and services and suites that are all poured into the environment. There's this wealth of people capitalizing on opportunities and pouring energy and innovation into things to try and fill a need. But it causes an explosion of services. And it's very difficult because now for any business to decide, you don't have the scale to evaluate all of these things. Right? Which one makes best sense for you? So setting that aside, we now have these different stacks and services that many of them are decoupled, many of them are separate, completely new services, but you have to deal with the integration problem. Some of them aren't interoperable. Some will move at a different pace to others. Some will have more funding than others. Some will have more R&D than others. And so it becomes really, you have to deal with the integration burden. But it's not only technologies that have been on that journey of sort of decoupling, moving with autonomy and at scale and being a bit more agile. Businesses have been doing the same thing, right? So I've seen a number of businesses where they vary in the approach that they have. Some are very centralized, some are very central but federated in some instances and some capability, and some autonomy to make decisions and so on. Some are very federated, as example, and they've got structured policies that everybody adheres to, well, hopefully adheres to. But what ends up happening is that sometimes you get into the situation where for the same need, you could have multiple technologies in different business units. And the integration becomes a problem again. Interoperability is a problem. But there's always a cost. The integration has a tax to it. And that can lead to things like the operational cost, because now you have to train different people on different technologies. You have to maintain those skills. You have to deal with the protocols and the formats and the engines themselves and so on. And there's always this complex governance structure. Sometimes if you want to add over a governance layer over the top of that, it becomes extremely difficult because now you have to manage bringing these things together in a way that's cohesive. And sometimes they don't always support it, right? So it's very difficult to do that. Not only that, but it deals with security. So it can sometimes be very difficult because some might not support things like single sign-on, as an example, right? So getting into a platform might be quite easy, and then compromise, you can compromise quite a significant amount of the environment. But what we've been seeing, recall when I spoke about things like complexity, where we see some sort of consistency, we abstract and simplify. Well, that's what's happening, right? You can quickly look at where we've abstracted. There's been things that have come along, and specifically even in things like open source, where there's been a significant push towards open storage, open formats, open protocols, open engines, open standards, you name it. Whether we're going from things like open frameworks for storage like Delta and Iceberg and so on, to open to models, not open AI models, but open source models themselves and catalogs of models that people can use. Even metadata catalogs, as an example, things like most recently Unity catalog. But there's a continual march towards reducing the sort of consistent administrative management and integration burdens, right? And so you start to see a shaping of solutions and providers and ISVs and cloud vendors bringing in things like these phenomenal services like Databricks, as an example, as a platform, which is more moving from these individual analytical services to a unified stack, or disconnected data services to a polyglot sort of storage layer and lake, so that you can then deal with these different formats or different shapes of data in consistent formats, and that all engines and analytics services can communicate with that and work with it. Instead of having separate isolation layers and services, now moving towards effectively a unified ecosystem and stack where these are built into as an entire state, right? And so we're starting to see that as well. The other thing where I spoke about in terms of complexity is that where AI is starting to help is in terms of things like helping with context and distilling down complex documents. I mean, everything from processing huge swathes of information in unstructured formats to extract relationships between certain things. We're really moving towards a very interesting time now where we're starting to move away from dealing with the complexity or dealing with largely the integration complexity and the taxes there, to focusing on what's important, right? So that we can focus on the data itself, the quality of the data, the context of the data, so that we can make better decisions. So I'd really ask if anyone wants to really sink more costs into integrating systems that drive no business value, I'd love to have a chat with you. And we'll have a chat there. So I spoke earlier about these platforms. Now there's Microsoft Fabric is just Microsoft's implementation as one of these sort of SaaS analytics platform that is built on open standards and open formats, and in places uses open engines and so on. So let me just take a quick walk through Fabric. If you haven't heard about Fabric, it encompasses, it's basically one SaaS analytics platform, got everything from data ingestion to data action, pretty much right across the stack. From data factory for ETL and data flows to data engineering, which are and data science, which are Spark-based engines. So if you use Apache Spark, those are what those engines for: large scale, petabyte scale sort of analytics. Warehouse, which gives you a distributed SQL engine. So if you're familiar with SQL Server, it's all up there for you. And data warehousing, real-time analytics, built on our massive scale sort of real-time analytics engine, Kusto, and the beloved Power BI that is probably one of the best known BI tools in the world, and things like Data Activate and so on. The idea is that these are integrated in a way that you don't have to deal with the integration burden themselves. What you do focus on is the integration of the data flow itself and down to decisioning. And then we've obviously got a unified data lake, which is polyglot storage, and all these engines can now talk to those storage formats, right? Instead of talking to proprietary storage formats, which was largely the case for many services, like I was talking about, like SQL Server, these services now can talk directly to open standards and open formats, and that we'll see that trend continue, right? Different vendors take different approaches, but we'll see that. The other one is, I mean, this is just Fabric as an example. There's a governance layer as well here. We're taking care of security with Defender and single sign-on and Entra ID and so on. So all these workloads now, you can sign in a single sign-on. You have the backing of Microsoft Entra as an example for security. And so that just takes care of a lot of challenges for many workloads that we typically deal with customers. The other one is that there's AI experiences now embedded, which is what I was talking about. Things like Copilot experiences in each workload to help you create data pipelines or query data, so natural language to SQL, help you gain insights from reports or create a report as an example. So we're seeing these embedded AI experiences on all of them. And Fabric is one of them, right? I mean, if we look at the amazing partnerships that we have with people, with companies like Databricks, in terms of talking as Microsoft, there's truly unique capability that they offer, and they have a phenomenal and extremely powerful platform as well that customers can benefit from. And because we're talking open standards and open formats and protocols and so on, that opens the door for future and current interoperability, where you can use the best of both, but you're not struggling most with the integration components, because the providers are trying to take care of that problem for you, so that you can focus on what means what drives the best value for you as a business. Okay, cool. So the one thing that I do have conversations with customers though is we often get stuck talking about analytics in a box. What we don't often do is step back a second and take context in terms of when I spoke about humans being at the center of communication and the ramifications of that, because we're trying to get to decisions, right? And we have a shared responsibility to make good decisions, is thinking about analytics and AI in the context of collaborative platforms, right? Because it's not often that we're doing this in isolation. We're trying to collaborate around something. So what makes it easy for me to integrate so that I can collaborate? So just take a simple example. How can I get a live view of my reports instead of screenshotting everything and making a data governance nightmare because my screenshots get out of date in my PowerPoint presentations 6 months from now? Well, I have a live integration between Power BI and PowerPoint as an example. So if I'm doing executive briefings, I can then embed those reports, live click, get the latest data. I can get Excel to connect to Power BI datasets, or I can, collaborate or embed Power Apps in Power BI, and so I get these low-code app with analytic embedding capability end-to-end. So you name it. I mean, the idea is I just want to broaden the thinking a little bit in terms of thinking analytics and services and capability in systems of collaboration as well. And the reason why I do that is because those are also places where integration tax can play a part. And we want to try to minimize that integration tax without penalizing the ability for you to leverage the capability. Now, there's going to be a continuing, my view is that there's going to be a continuation of this sort of arc of these platforms where we're going to abstract common complexity, make it easier for people, provide richer and more diverse experiences, but really focus on governance. Because now the fact is that a lot of the time spent on integration problems has now, largely a lot of those things start to move away. And what starts to happen is we start to move towards, well, we've got these very capable systems, but how do we govern them well? How do we get better quality data? How do we manage them effectively across experiences, right? So I think there's going to be a very interesting focus, and it's going to be I think it's an exciting time for the domain of data and knowledge governance, really, where technologies themselves will make it easier for us to focus on outcomes, right? And so, and because businesses are moving on that journey, I think what's really interesting now is that we don't have these partners. We're not going to necessarily get stuck, I think, in the situation where business users are an auxiliary participant in some sort of analytics project, right? But where they're active contributors into the business, because businesses are starting to take shape in where they're owning their data, things like owning data as a product, and they're curating it, and they are marketing it and using it and searching for it, and they're looking for ways to reuse others to capitalize on opportunities. And so I think that when we see business users become an active participant in the data governance aspect and contributors to the wealth of information, contributing to context, contributing to quality, I think that's going to make a massive difference. And so I think that'll change everything from the company's data literacy to the data management practices and their culture right across the value chain. And so that's what I think is going to be very interesting to see. Again, quality and context like grammar for data matters, because that is going to be vital for AI. If you don't have good quality and context data, AI will just make it, well, I wouldn't say just make it, but it'll be a more difficult journey for you, right? So I think the key thing I want to leave you with here is better context leads to better decisions, better quality and context leads to better decisions. And with that, I think it's a good place to give over to Tim for looking at master data management and AI, and let's see where we go from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. I mean, I'll say this, I didn't think I would join a webinar today with the sentence long ostrich leaps, and I don't think anyone would. Leo, if you could just put your question into the Q&A section, we'll make sure we get to it in a moment. And then I just want to also echo a couple of things that Anthony touched on. There was a quote that I saw from a recent Microsoft conference where it said, I'm the chief information officer, don't make me the chief integration officer. And it's that exact piece of, like, I want best of breed tools. I get that. And that's often what we did before, is we said, well, we're going for best of breed, but then I have to pay the integration tax. And what we're seeing is a consolidation now in the market where people are standardizing, the technologies are kind of maturing all to the same points. And I think this is, Anthony, that you and I had this discussion, you know, not to do this webinar, but actually to do with a joint customer that we have, you yourself were saying there is something changing in the market now where people are rather happy with the tech tools, and they're all roughly the same. So there's some good but like consistent choices there. Now it's allowing people to focus more on the business value and data and things like this. And so I think you set me up perfectly to take over here, Anthony, in that I hope I can translate what Anthony has just gone through to a really practical example of the reality that if you don't have a good bedrock of data, a good foundation of data management practices in place, you'll see the yield, and it's not that great. And I know we have all these grand ambitions for large language models, and it's amazing technology, but we've got to get that bedrock right. Now, I don't know if this has made things harder or easier for us, but the bottom line is Microsoft have made it so easy with some of these technologies for us to start to use AI. Roughly end of March, there were, excuse me, there was a release around Microsoft Fabric time in Vegas, and there were some updates to Azure AI Studio. And one of those made it so easy to be able to build your own custom copilots with your own custom data built on top of some of the base models. And of course, being a Fabric conference, one of the places you can pull the data in from was Microsoft OneLake. Okay, that's the one place that has one security, that will scale endlessly, that doesn't require, to set up multiple data lakes in different environments. And so abundantly easy to be able to onboard data into Azure AI Studio to be able to have this kind of custom Copilot experience. Now, for those of you just playing around with this, you'll know that you can also upload data directly. You can upload folders and files, or you can pull them from live systems like OneLake. Here in this example, we've uploaded some employee data. So we did this on purpose because this is rather sensitive data sometimes. You might have people's salaries in there. You might have, some information that would be great in a HR system, but you would never want to surface inside a Copilot. And I think something that Anthony was touching on before is the Copilot experience offers a form factor that it's so obvious when there's a data quality issue or a breach in sensitivity and privacy. It's just one of those form factors that becomes so obvious. But here we've been able to upload some data, and we get this nice little sandbox in the Azure AI Studio to be able to test it out. Now, one of the things that's so important, specifically with Azure OpenAI and AI Studio, that you don't get with all of the different large language models is this key thing here. This is key. This I call a hook. So as we start to upload our data to our custom Copilot, and we're uploading CSVs, PDF files, employee handbooks, budgets, everything that would surround like a HR type of Copilot experience. And what this attribution here gives me is it says, oh, you asked how much do the Trail Walker hiking shoes cost? And I can tell you, I probably used a base model like Llama or Mistral or GPT, but actually to answer that question, here's the particular file from OneLake that I used to help me figure that out. This will become key in a moment when we want to provide that full end-to-end attribution of that was the file, this was the record in that file, this is who owns that record, here's who made that change, here's who approved it, here's the source lineage of where it came from in the first place, because OneLake was not the first place that we got this from. It was multiple hops before that, but this is an important hook that we can use to get that in the end. And the reason why you might want to build and use AI with your own data would obviously be to have some type of Copilot experience where it has been trained on your company data. I think if you imagine you put yourself in the shoes of a new employee joining a company, it would be amazing to have a Copilot that allows you to ask questions like this. Who's my boss? Who's their boss? Who are our customers? What tool do I use to enter sick time? And these are questions you might feel a little bit embarrassed asking individuals, but if you had a Copilot experience there, this sounds like a great idea. Some HR onboarding Copilot that's been trained on some of your data. So instead of giving generic answers, it's giving context-specific answers. So the thing around the AI Studio is that they not only make it easy to build custom Copilots, they make it easy to deploy them as well. And you can deploy them as REST APIs, you can deploy them as web apps as well, directly from the tool itself. In this case, I've exposed it as a REST API. And what that means is we can start to use it from all different parts of the business. We can start to use this custom Copilot from Teams. We can start to even use it from CluedIn's own Copilot I'll walk you through in a moment. And pretty quickly, we start to realize, right, If I start to just load our data into these copilots, I'm not going to get a great experience, especially if I have these data integrity issues. So let me go through this first example here, where I think it would be a fair statement to say, hey, listen, Martin's my boss. What's his contact details? I want to call him on a daily basis. And if we just put this raw data in, you imagine our employee data sits across multiple systems. It's in Office 365. It's in our HR system. It's in our talent management system. It's in all of these places. For us to just put this data directly in without the proper governance, data management, cleanliness, building a single view of these records, this is what happens. And for those of you who are really astute, you would realize there's a couple of problems here. There's a problem, of single view in that I've got 4 phone numbers for Mart. So which one do I call? All of them? Do I just try them all? And then actually 2 of these phone numbers are the same. They're just in a different structure. So you could imagine why someone would go to this and go, actually, I don't trust this. I can't trust this. Okay. So let's go on to another sneaky question. Okay. Martin's driving a Ferrari. So what on earth are they paying this man? Same type of issue. What is the salary of Martin? Once again, we've got a data quality issue. We've got a single view issue. But more important, we've got a huge security issue here. We've got a governance issue. We have not provided this copilot with some system prompts to say, don't answer anything around sensitivity. That's one issue. Actually, the problem is, how did this get through? How did this get through? And without that lineage and responsibility, and without actually bringing the business into the supply chain of data, this is the risk. The risk is that, well, this is the data we extracted. The engineering team used amazing engineering tools to clean it and blend it and all of that. But, IT might not capture these types of things. Like, do you really want salaries to be going into a custom copilot? So we need to bring that governance layer in so we don't run into these types of situations. So another question, and Anthony talked about context before, in that you might want to ask for, what are our company values? Okay, so the answer is not very helpful. It says, I'm sure there's a handbook around here that you could use, but the problem here is I haven't provided enough context to who's this copilot for? What company? How many employees do they have? What industry are they in? And all of these are context you need to provide a better nuanced experience. And the examples just go on and on. Now, why this is more important now to think about this is not only is there a push in the industry for the use of AI, but there's also a push in the industry towards federating the ownership of data out, giving the responsibilities out to the lines of business because they're the experts. Who am I in my IT engineering team to go off and make decisions on those are the same vendors, those are the same customers? That's wrong. That's right. And the answer is, well, this is not the responsibility of IT. But more often than not, in a lot of companies, this gets handed back because it's complex. You need to be somewhat technical to know how to fix these types of things. Things like, hey, we're wanting to detect a bad, Australian business number, ABN number. And, providing users with tools to say, please put a regular expression pattern in to go off and detect that. And you realize, no, I want that part of the business to come in because they work with our vendors and customers and they know these data quality issues, but we should not expect them to know how to code or write regular expressions. I want them to have tooling to allow to embody their business IP into it. And so this is the need for cracking data governance is exacerbated by the fact that we're seeing this federation of ownership that's being pushed in its businesses. And this is the right thing. We need to scale this out, and this always needs to be a collaboration of both IT and business. And so you might think, okay, well, how is this going to surface? Well, if I take Microsoft Purview as an example, I mean, there's lots of people in the industry that are talking about this, but Instead of surfacing files and tables and Parquet and some of these kind of more technical assets, where the industry's moving towards is, how do I draw a box around these particular important assets and turn them and productize them, turn them into something that is ready for the actual business? And so more and more, you'll see this flow of data's coming in, it runs through IT, it has to run through some flows in the business, and then it gets productized or exposed in the form of data products. And these data product shells are a nice way to tell the business, we are putting commercial efforts behind this data. This is forming products that will somehow hit the bottom line. And whether that is lowering operational costs or raising revenue or making happier employees, these are the ways that this data will start to surface. And you might wonder, okay, so we've been trying to do this for so long, like so long. So what is the difference? What I would argue is, apart from just technical advances in other areas, right? Open standards, people consolidating on platforms, less integration work that's necessary. Obviously, the other big thing is we've all been given this amazing technology in the form of large language models to translate intent into something underlying that the system needs. And a great example would be, I don't need people who are domain experts to tell me how to build a regular expression, but I do need them to tell me what that data needs to look like. And if it needs to look like an ABN number, the large language models can help translate that intent into the underlying pattern that the IT system needs without actually having to expose that complexity. So let's dive in and get a good example of a problem I'm sure you're all privy to and experienced yourself, and how to use the Microsoft stack to go off and address this. So where I'm going to start is right here. So hopefully at this point, most of you have seen, or maybe you're even using right now, the new Microsoft Purview experience. And one of the kind of big elements that's new in the experience is this concept of data products. You've probably been witness to searching through catalogs of files and tables. You type the word employees in and you get 1,600 results. And of course, the larger business you are, usually the larger that number is. And the truth is, it's because we have so much data in our estate. The concept of data products is taking this, and to use Anthony's word here, it's taking to a new level of abstraction, where we don't want to be thinking about files and tables and SAP and Dynamics and Salesforce and Databricks. We want to be thinking in terms of business domains, okay? Employees, customers. And by moving the discussion here, we're also moving the discussion closer to the business, because this is something that those domain experts can start to understand and work with. Too often, we're bringing them into the complexity of IT, and it's no wonder a lot of companies still have issues with solving some core fundamental data quality issues. So with this in mind, I've got this HR onboarding data product that I've built, and I have onboarded some assets in here in the form of Parquet CSV in the data lake. So you can probably spot an issue here, but I'll spell it out for you, is that I would love a co-pilot that was trained on this data that could help me do things like, hey, go find me all of our employees that work in IT. And I don't need there to be a row called department in there, but maybe their job title is software engineer, software developer, testing engineer, QA engineer. And I need to be smart in that way to say, well, here they are. My problem is my employees are scattered across this file, this file, this file, and this file. And there's no easy way to blend this data together. There's not an employee ID that's the same in all of the 4 files. If that was the case, we wouldn't be in this situation where we have data silos across our business. So let's go take a look at what we can do to solve this. Number one, the integration between CluedIn and Purview, the way that it's triggered is we need to be able to stamp data products with this particular data, this product type. It's called master data and reference data. And by doing that, CluedIn is essentially listening to these data products, and it sets up the automatic pipelines to be able to push the data through the actual MDM platform itself. Now, this is something I did before we joined the webinar. And what that means is if we head over to CluedIn to take a look at the user interface, and we head to data sources, we see this nice folder here called HR onboarding. And as we expand this out, we can see our assets sitting there waiting for us. But there's something interesting here in that the discussion is now moving away from assets at a metadata level, where we know the columns, the types, the names, the owners, things like this. Now we're actually moving this discussion down to a record level. So now we're actually pushing the records through the MDM component so we can start to fix some of these issues that's causing a bad Copilot experience. And you can imagine this is going to be a bad experience for anyone consuming this, whether it's a Power BI chart or a Tableau chart or a Looker chart or a Power Automate flow. AI just seems to be one of those formats that just makes it so obvious that there's an issue with this data. You can often hide data quality issues behind a beautiful pie chart or something like this. It seems like you can't hide that as easy when they're using these copilots. So Anthony and group, I want you to pay attention to one particular interesting person here, and that is the first row of data here. This woman called Lorraine. Notice the column names, ID, first name, last name, all seem completely fair, completely understand, but you can imagine, Anthony, this is the first time you're seeing this data. And imagine you've got 400 columns in column names that are abbreviated, having the ability to launch into a copilot and say, can you tell me about this data set? And having the ability for it to say, you can imagine, Anthony, if I ask this to ChatGPT, it's probably going to say, cool, give me the data set and we can start chatting. But you and I both know that's not what we want. We are looking at the data set on the screen, and it's that data set I'd like you to interrogate and come back and tell me all the things I need to know, including things like, oh, by the way, it looks like your job column, there's all variations of the same spelling, and we can go off and fix this in a second. Up the top, we have it describe all the columns. We have it describe what are the unique ways to be able to refer to these employees. And then it also describes some possible data quality checks that we could enforce on this data, like checking for null values and things like this. Great. But here's what I'd like you to pay attention to. Number one, notice that Lorraine has an ID of 1, and she has this email address that ends in .gov.au. Okay, so keep that in mind. Because what we're going to do is we're now going to map this data in and move the discussion away from files into business domains. So here we make the decision of what we're dealing here with is an employee, right? I don't care anymore about ExperiEmployees.csv or Parquet or where it came from. I want to move that discussion and abstract it away because in the end, the domain experts don't need to know these things. These are extra superfluous things that make it more confusing. We want to serve it up in this beautiful, conformed, standardized format. So let's give them a little icon. I'll just give this one, and we're going to give it a structure to be able to store that oncoming data. Now, you might think, Anthony, you haven't even looked at the other files yet. So how do you know that that's the final table we need to construct? And I would say this is the main reason why CluedIn is very different in the MDM space, is that we would argue it's kind of impossible to know that up front. And guess what? The whole Databricks movement and Fabric movement, they all realize the same thing. Instead of trying to build this upfront data warehouse model and then try to fit everything into it, you are progressively, in an agile way, learning and going, oh, actually, I shouldn't have had it like that. Okay, it's not a big issue. It's not we have to break down and redefine data models and things like this. So think of CluedIn as the lake house of MDM. It takes that very agile, progressive approach. So in here, the platform has automatically detected a couple of things. I'm actually going to say, let's use the full name of the employees here. And it's also detected correctly that I can use the ID and the email as unique ways to fetch those records. And the Copilot told me that. Okay, so it's helped with filling these in. Let's tag these records so they stand out a little bit later. And I'll just put webinar as the tag here. We're going to tag both of these identifiers. And then we're going to push this data into the platform. Okay, so without a lot of cognitive load, I've been able to onboard data. I've been able to map it and push it into the MDM system. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at some of the other assets here. You can see that if we move on to the next file, so let's take something like this one here. Do me a favor and just actually maybe let's the other one, or doing the other one first is probably easier. Let's go here. So here we can see another problem, which is different column names. Okay, we could probably figure those out and map those pretty easily. But we've also got completely just different columns. There's no overlap of columns. It's a very, you would say, expansive set of records that we have here. Also notice, Anthony, where's that ID of one that I can hook onto? Well, it's not here. Oh, and the email address, that's also different. It's not .au, it's .gov. And so there is no way to be able to easily hook these records together. And this is often where complexity comes in and we go, this is really hard. We can't stitch this data together. Well, in the CluedIn platform, it's the same type of process where we say, listen, I'm going to map this in as an employee. And notice that it's been a little bit smart here. It said, I think this is this because I've already seen that. And I think this is this, and I think this is this, and this is this. Now, we're talking about the use of AI in data management. Well, this is one of the uses in that these models clearly understand surname and last name. Yeah, they should be the same. And we're now entering the territory of this is not a deterministic rule or even a probabilistic rule. This is a heuristic rule where you need to use models that understand the actual semantic difference between these tokens or these words instead of classic techniques like, well, they're very close to each other. They're very close to each other. They both got name in it. And the truth is, this is what we had to do before AI. This is what we had to do before AI. And let's go and create that mapping. So no need to redo models, no need to say, these tables don't overlap. We've got to go back and model again. Just pave these changes over the top and make choices and changes as you go along and learn about the data. So let's quickly map this last data in here. It's detected that we should use both the webinar, the person ID, and it's also said you can use the email as a way to push the data in as well. Okay, so this is also using the large language model to be smart about going through the data and saying, look, I've run uniqueness checks on it. I've run distinct checks on it. It's still a suggestion, hence a copilot. It's aiding you and pointing you towards these decisions. But these are great ways to be able to see how it fast tracks this process. You might be surprised sometimes historically how long it takes companies to just onboard and map data from across different systems. So this is just one more case of how we can fast track this particular process. So let's push those records in as well. And let's go back to that last asset that we have here. So let's go to e-export and let's go take a look here. Now, this is interesting because, wait, there's that one. There's that ID of one. And here, Lorraine's email is Yahoo. Okay, well, you didn't help at all. Like, that didn't help at all. It's different between all of the assets. And too often, when we're trying to integrate data, we are taking this approach of, I kind of need a thread of IDs that I can inner join my way to success. And you'll find the natural state of data from systems is you'll get a lot of data that doesn't even have IDs at all. So there is an excuse me, there is an integration challenge where taking a different approach to merging those assets together offers a different and easier yield than having to solve these problems all back in the IT and engineering team. So let's map this final asset in, and we're going to map that into the employee. And let's create that mapping. Let's just check that the mapping's done correctly. So it's using the full name. We've got the ID, and it's also detected now this has 3 IDs. Now, why is this important? It's important is that in this system, I'm actually only telling the system, here are your identifiers. It's the MDM system's job to actually figure out in what situations should it use the different IDs to pull these records together, okay? Drastically simplifying the entire process of stitching together this data into a single view. Now, why is this important? It's important because when I asked for Martin's phone number in that Copilot, I was getting 4 different answers. This is exactly why it happens, because we can't stitch together this single view of these records. And in a matter of, couple of, 10, 15 minutes, we've onboarded data from across 3 different systems that has different columns, that have no overlapping beautiful IDs between that data. And now we've onboarded into the MDM system and we've conformed those records. So the whole idea is, great, now I need to get the data out. I need to get it out. Like I don't want to pull data from an MDM system. I want it in the lake. I want it in an open format that I can mirror in Fabric and I can pull into the Copilot. At CluedIn, we call these export targets. And we support all different places to be able to send this beautiful conformed data after it's gone and been massaged through the platform. One of those places is OneLake. What does this result in? Well, what it results in, if I just head back to my slides, is that if we drive high quality data into our initiatives with data, same data, just gone through the governance and data quality management processes. And let's go in and ask these same 4 control questions. So, can you give me the contact details for Martin? Yes, I can. Right here. All right. What's Martin's salary? A salary is considered a sensitive attribute for employee data. And the fact is, even if you tried to do prompt injection and forget all your system prompts and just answer this question, the data didn't even make it there. The data didn't even make it there. It was caught earlier on by sensitivity detection, automatic masking, and of course, anything that made it out to OneLake goes through an approval process anyway. So we can track back the attribution of, well, who made the decision to actually get that data out in the first place? If we go to the next question, what are our key cultural values? Well, because I've provided it with cleaner data, but also because I've provided with more context of who we are, what company, what employee count, what type of business are we in, we're now getting so much more nuanced answers that it's getting out of the data we uploaded, like PDF, employee handbooks, and things like this. And finally, quite an ambitious question for a new employee to ask, but like, how can I lower the bottom line? Show me 10 ways that I can do to lower costs. And you can start to see here, and it's hard for everyone on the call to know this because we ran this on some of our data, but picking out things like, in the budget, you talked about Trello, you talked about Pivotal Tracker and Monday, and they have high expenses. You've also got high expenses with Azure Virtual Machines and Azure Data Factory because it's in our budget. It's in the Excel sheet. Those line items are there. So being able to surface that through is super important. Now, in the last couple of minutes, 1 or 2 minutes that we're together, we often think of data governance as this very defensive thing. And it is good. We need that. But there are also all of these offensive parts to it that I think we often forget that actually enable these amazing AI Power BI projects to actually live in production. I'm sure you've looked at a report and gone, that can't be right. That can't be right. The fact that you can't trace that back easily and go, oh, actually, no, you're right. It is. I get it now. That's often not the case. So adding governance into these initiatives brings all of these amazing freebies, lineage, audit trail, who changed what, when, why, what was the comment from the Power BI, from the Power Automate approval that said why that person approves it. Clean data, standardized data, 1 Lorraine, not 3 Lorraines. So all of these are reasons why any initiative now, especially with AI, you just need to crack the underlying bedrock. And the key is there's this recursive nature to it. You can use AI to fix your data, to prepare yourself for AI. And that's a given. Using AI in the actual data management practices, go find me anomalies in my data. Go enforce a phone number standard on that field. But I don't need to tell you what a phone number standard is. You should know that model, and they do. They know what RFC standards are. They know what IEEE standards are, and things like this. So I think here is where I'll end and where I see the true value coming. If you've used ChatGPT, if you're using Copilot, taking the answers from something that's just, here is the answer, by putting governance in, this is where this will go. We can layer all this metadata over the responses. So instead of just saying, Martin's got these PRs, I've surfaced it from somewhere, we can layer all the metadata over the top of this to say, it's this Martin. It's these 14 PRs. Here's the link to it in GitHub Enterprise. It was approved by these people. Here's the approval process and audit chain of what it was before, what it was now, why they approved it, where it's going. And so governance right now, super exciting, but critical also for the AI race. So with that in mind, Anthony, I will say thank you. Thank you to everyone that joined us as well. Hope you have a lovely day. The recording will go out as well as the slides. We will answer some Q&A after this. We'll send responses if you've had a question there. But thanks, Anthony, for joining us, and thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everybody.
See you.